Well, thanks, Mark, and thanks for having me here. I guess I'm going to sound a bit like a stuck record, but as something of a veteran of the hydrogen industry, this is a really amazing event to see all of these people coming together, the excitement, and in particular this commitment to integration of all the different areas, and also scale, being prepared to work at scale, which I think is something that the hydrogen sector has been really waiting for certainly the whole of my career. So what I'm going to talk about is a project which is kind of hopefully a piece of that jigsaw about getting to scale, which is a project that we've been working on with Inovyn and Costain, which is about using, ideally, a larger fleet of hydrogen buses to create a sufficient demand to start to get hydrogen flowing from the Inovyn chlor-alkali plant into the mobility sector. Just a very quick introduction to Element Energy. We're a low-carbon energy consultancy. I'm the director responsible for the hydrogen sector. At any given time, we've got between about 15 and 20 people working in hydrogen. We do the usual strategic studies, but I guess the work that I'm particularly proud of is the work that we've done on initiating early deployment projects when it's very challenging in this phase. So that's projects like the London and Aberdeen hydrogen bus projects, and then looking forwards, the Jive project, and then the recently announced H2 Bus Europe project, which are going to bring tens and then eventually hundreds of buses into the UK, and while doing that, start dragging the price of the vehicles and the associated hydrogen down to an affordable level. So just to give a little bit of context on the project, Frank already introduced the Inovyn plant. Fundamentally, that plant has hydrogen available, which could potentially be used for the mobility sector. And there's about 20 tons of that hydrogen available. 20 tons of hydrogen corresponds to a fleet of about 1,000 buses, in fact more than 1,000 buses, and potentially around about 40,000 cars. But the challenge is, for a big industrial site like that, to get going on this and all of the costs of permissions and the infrastructure that's required at that site, you need a minimum scale to get started. And when you look around the range of hydrogen mobility options that there are, the one that springs out as the most easily deployable and commercially ready is the hydrogen bus. That's not to say that the others don't have lots of merit as and when they become available, but right now the hydrogen bus is the one that seems to make the most sense. And as a consequence of that, Inovyn pulled together this team of ourselves and Costain to study the feasibility of really creating a demand of a sufficient scale to get hydrogen flowing from the Inovyn plant. And I guess the study, the work, has three main components. There's the work here, which is the work that needs to be done on the Inovyn site. And there's quite a lot to do at the plant to get the hydrogen flowing in the right way, and then to clean the hydrogen and to compress the hydrogen. So that's the work that Costain did, an excellent engineering study understanding the dynamics of that. Then, of course, the hydrogen needs to be moved from the Inovyn site to the bus depots, and new bus depots at each site. And, of course, then the buses themselves need to be operated. And I'll start by just quickly talking about the buses. So this graph, which has got slightly distorted, just shows why we're interested in buses. It shows the reduction in cost of hydrogen buses from 2009 to today. And we've already seen roughly a factor of 3 reduction in the cost of buses, to the point that today, under the Jive projects, which are the projects which are being announced, Transport for London recently announced their hydrogen bus deployment, you're probably talking about a bus price in the range £500,000 to £550,000. But more interesting than that is that bus manufacturers are telling us that if we can get to demands of only 100 buses per year, 150 buses per year, they're in a position to make a further cost reduction to bring the price down, and this is actually a chart in euros, below 400,000 euros. And given that a battery electric bus costs that, and in many cases more than that, that step basically moves us into a world where we compete commercially for zero emission routes. Which is a very exciting moment for the hydrogen sector. You can actually make a commercial proposition as opposed to effectively a subsidised proposition. And perhaps even more exciting than that, we see 2 of the UK's leading bus builders, in fact the 2 leading bus builders in the UK, with active fuel cell development programs. So Wrightbus announced as part of a partnership at the start of this week that they're planning to deploy 600 buses by 2023 across Europe, and that they'll do that at a price of at or below 375,000 euros. That they're in a position to do that at a price at or below 375,000 euros. A major step forward for the sector. And then also we can see outside the fantastic work that Alexander Dennis and Arcola have done together in launching their bus. We obviously just heard about the 25 bus deployment that's already planned. And of course, Arcola are also setting up production facilities in the region. So 2 great options for the region in terms of the buses. And then actually, when we look across Europe, we're tracking about 14 bus OEMs with programs to develop fuel cell buses. So it's not as if the UK is alone. There will also be other European options. And then when you look at demand, this is a map of the different bus depots in and around the Liverpool city region, the greater Liverpool region, I guess. You can see that the Inovyn plant, which is this green dot, is right in the middle of it, which means that there are plenty of bus depots within easy access. And bus statistics are really hard to gather, but it looks like there's roughly 1,100 buses operating out of those depots. And what that means is that the amount of hydrogen that's available at the Inovyn plant is pretty much equivalent to the amount of hydrogen that would be created if the entire fleet was converted to hydrogen, which is a pretty useful thing and a very useful way to get the hydrogen sector started in the area. As part of the project, we've also had discussions with both Arriva and Stagecoach, the two main bus operators in the region. We've visited their sites, and in short, the conclusion is that there's no practical reason why you couldn't put a hydrogen fueling station and also convert the maintenance facilities to operate on hydrogen. So there's nothing to stop a major program at these early depots moving to hydrogen. We've also looked at routes and where you'd operate the vehicles. The big advantage of hydrogen for buses is that they can do difficult, long-duration routes into and out of the city centres. So at both depots, the strategy is to basically pick two routes, probably one year after the other. And these are the routes that are from those depots operating into the city centres. That leads to a bus demand of about 90 buses and creates a hydrogen demand of about 1,300 kilos of hydrogen a day. So the idea is to basically call that the project, the start of the project. That's a way of initiating this at a sufficient scale. And then beyond that, there's scope to expand to the greater fleet. The way that we would move the hydrogen is via tube trailer. The strategy that we worked up in the feasibility study, or that others could be explored, is called a trailer swap strategy. So that involves filling the trailer at the Inovyn plant, moving to the hydrogen refueling station, and then returning with empty trailers as and when the hydrogen is used. The big advantage of that strategy is that you've effectively put the storage on wheels, and that minimises the footprint of the plant. So this is an example designed from a company called Nell, who have shown how you can effectively fill a fleet of roughly 50 buses on a footprint of 100 square metres, but that can be easily expanded to cover the whole depot by simply adding additional tube trailer bays, and eventually a solution to cover 150, 200 buses in an area of under 300 square metres, which is perfectly compatible with the kinds of areas that are available in bus depots. And then finally, at the production site, as I said, Costain have done a lot of work with Inovyn engineers to devise a solution. The current proposal is a 2 times 5 tonne a day compression facility with PSAs to do the hydrogen storage. The observant amongst you will notice that that's considerably more than the amount of hydrogen that will be used for the buses. So getting this project off the ground means that there'll be enough capacity for ready and very rapid expansion of demand for the region. So final slide, just quickly concluding. Essentially, we've done a study of a 90-bus project and concluded that there are no technical showstoppers. As Frank said, every single bit of this has been done before. What hasn't been done is it has been put together, and it hasn't been done at this kind of scale. We've also got UK-based bus builders who are ready to supply and also to compete for the supply to the project. And the bus operators are willing to act, provided that the state is able to step in and help them bridge the gap from operating a zero-emission bus to operating a diesel bus. And there is a requirement for public sector to lead. There's also some requirement for the public sector to help to catalyse the deployment of the infrastructure and the production equipment. And I think there's also an interesting trade-off between the amount of money that needs to be spent on that infrastructure and the willingness of the public sector to lead. If, for example, it was possible to make a cast iron commitment to deploy 1,000 buses by 2030, then it would be a lot easier for the private sector to make those initial investments. So the benefits of making this investment are fairly straightforward. It's obviously directly a completely zero emission solution, essentially a completely zero carbon and zero emission solution, and will bring immediate direct employment benefits to the region. There are then indirect employment benefits as a result of having been first to do this and to do this at scale. And I think that the final point is that it's a major differentiator for the region. As a result of unlocking this flow of hydrogen, the cost of hydrogen in the region will be significantly lower than it is anywhere else in the country. And what that will do is then attract other mobility actors and other actors in other energy sectors to come to the region, and will really help to prepare the region for the subsequent deployments which come from projects of an even larger scale, like the HyNet project. So I'll leave you with this vision, which I should hat tip to Costain, who produced this nice image of the salt and the chlorine up here, working all the way down through the Runcorn facility into the tube trailers and then out into the buses. Thank you.